Call to order a regular meeting for the Normal Town Council for February 19th, 2018. Please call the roll.
Mayor Kus?
Here.
Mr. Fritzen?
Here.
Mr. McBride?
Here.
Mrs. Cummings?
Here.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Here.
Mr. Preston?
Here.
Mr. McCarthy?
Here.
We'll begin with a pledge of allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We've had two requests for public comment tonight, and I'll take those in the order in which we received them. The first speaker is Ron Ulmer. Again, I will remind that you have 3 minutes to speak tonight, and we would ask that you give your name and address for the record. Ron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Ron Ulmer, a Normal resident. Many years have gone by since Bloomington Normal was first notified by the federal government that the soccer fields could not remain at the current location next to Sierra. Private investors have shown no interest in a facility. Neither has any citizen-led group raised any significant amounts of money to build or support the facility. Bloomington Normal and most other central Illinois communities are facing structural deficits, cutting currently desired services, raising taxes and fees, and considering laying off employees. Additionally, Illinois is the #1 state in losing population, which is the result of several factors. However, the biggest contributor to people voting with their feet is the high overall tax burden. I propose that the local elected politicians, citizens, and all those interested mount a communication campaign to the airline regulators, the airport regulators, and to our representatives in Washington for them to rescind the rule and regulation that force the soccer fields to be moved. The current administration is rescinding orders, rules, and regulations at the fastest rate in history. So we may have an ear that will listen to us. Few of these projects break even, let alone make money. We all know all the stories of the Coliseum. I looked up the Corn Crib baseball field. The games attract 1,000 fewer fans than 8 years ago. The Corn Crib cost $9 million to build, opening in 2010. Today, the tax assessor lists the fair cash value at $1.2 million, paying only $35,000 in property tax. One additional objection: the Sports Facility Advisor, founder, and CEO also operates facilities such as this. It's certainly in his best interest to recommend the project be undertaken, regardless of what the numbers would show. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Bob Kohlhaas.
Good evening. I'm Bob Kohlheis, 38 Boardwalk Circle in Bloomington, Illinois. I'm speaking tonight to provide support of studying the feasibility of a multi-sports complex. I've lived in the community for 28 years. For a little background and why I would be here speaking, and that would be we have 4 children. They're all grown and employed elsewhere. But in their growing up, I was in one of my many volunteer hats that I've worn in the community. I have, for a period of time, I was coaching year-round of baseball, soccer, basketball. Then we had the swimming and the gymnastics and then fine arts and all that. But I have been intimately involved with the complex as it exists now. One of my roles was on the PCSL board in the past, and I was the leader to fully develop that complex. I started when there were 6 fields and only enough parking for that to the 20 fields that we have. That development was all done by volunteers, and so we're very proud of that, and it's served tens of thousands of people over the year. So I would support this because I believe this would be a community amenity for the community that would be a reason for people to move to this community. I would bring tourism to the community and leave a positive image for the community, which then turns into businesses wanting to be located here. The multi-sport complex is a fantastic approach, serving soccer, cricket, lacrosse, possible wellness trail, nature component, cross-country, and even football for all-purpose field. So I support your leadership in pursuing this. It's a process that takes many steps, and it's not a process that can be done in one fell swoop. And so I would encourage a phased approach to start with just a base minimum, and then over time, as budget requires, features can be added as needed. But I think in my travels, every community that has one of these complexes, it is not a negative to that community, only a positive. Thank you for your time.
We now move on to the omnibus agenda, items considered routine and will be handled by one vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. I would like to be excused from voting on any bills I may have incurred in my duties as mayor.
Item G, please.
I'd like to pull item E.
Motion for approval.
So moved. Second.
Items considered on the omnibus with one vote are approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of February 5th, 2018, and approval of town of normal expenditures for payment as of February 14th, 2018. A motion approving hourly rates and direct costs for 2018 with Clark Dietz Incorporated, Crawford Murphy and Tilley Incorporated, Farnsworth Group, Lewis Yaki and Brown Incorporated, Maurer Stutz Incorporated, and White and Company to provide engineering services for various town departments. A resolution authorizing an agreement for construction materials testing services for the 2018 construction season with Ramsey Geotechnical Engineering, LLC, and a resolution approving a salary schedule adjustment for classified employees to reflect a cost of living adjustment. Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The omnibus agenda is approved with the exception of two items, the first being item E, a resolution authorizing a lease amendment with Subway Real Estate, LLC, for premises located in Uptown Station. Ms. Lorenz?
Yes, I'd like to move for that resolution.
Second.
Thank you. Ms. Lorenz?
Okay, I pulled this mostly to just try to get some background information, perhaps from staff, about what maybe are the underlying issues causing the restructure for this lease agreement. And in that also maybe address why we've gone from what had been a 5-year to now I think is 10-year.
Thank you for the question. Recently, the Subway operation within this building was sold. That franchise was sold. There are new owners that actually purchased a number of Subway restaurants in the community. Shortly after that purchase, the new owner came to see me, and we talked about the Subway that's located in this building. They shared with me at the time that their sales figures were not terrible, but not what they had hoped, although they indicated they're still committed to the location and they're pleased to be here and they like their store. But they indicated that they were requesting some relief in the lease amount to basically to acknowledge some of the sales volume they were experiencing here. They also said in exchange for that, they'd be willing to extend the lease to a longer-term commitment, which we felt was in our best interest. I think Subway has done an excellent job of providing service to the users of this building, particularly the transportation customers. We've been very pleased. They've been open. They're open while the building is open, which is required. And there are certain times that there's not much traffic in the building, but they're still here and available to provide service to the customers of the transportation center. So we also feel their menu offerings are definitely adequate to meet the needs of our customers. So we discussed various adjustments to the rent, and we eventually came to an agreement on what was in your packet, and we feel that's reasonable, and they certainly felt good about it. We're appreciative of our willingness to make an adjustment, and I think they look forward to a long-term relationship with the town here in Uptown Station. I will add that from a revenue perspective, even though we're always looking to generate revenue, we have to be careful with this facility, as much of it was financed with tax-exempt bonds, and there are some very strict IRS limits on the ability of a local government to generate income on facilities that were financed with tax-exempt bonds. So our finance director was felt that kind of pleased that that gives us a little cushion from that limit. We watch that very, very closely. Even the amounts that people pay for parking are calculated in our overall revenue totals that we have to carefully manage so as not to put our tax-exempt bonds at risk. So the side benefit of a little bit lower lease payment, it gives us a little more cushion in that regard. But the bottom line is we feel Subway provides an excellent service to our patrons here in Uptown Station, and we want them to continue to operate, and so that's why we're recommending this change in the lease.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Preston.
Just to follow up a little bit on Ms. Lorenz's questions, I guess I'll start with staff. What you talked about the limits to our revenue because this building is, financed by tax-exempt bonds. What is that limit? Just to give us a feel, like how close are we?
I'll ask, see if Mr. Hune can respond to that. I know we, while he's walking up there, it's something that our bond counsel watches closely on our behalf, and they're constantly keeping us vigilant as to not generate too much revenue because the IRS has become much more aggressive in following up with public entities that have used tax-exempt bonds for these type of facilities, and they're fairly aggressive in identifying problem areas, and the risk to us is that a tax-exempt issue becomes a taxable issue, which is, that's a significant penalty. I don't know if Andrew can speak exactly to that limit or not, but
Sure.
I'll try.
The code's got some complexities to it, but typically it's 10% of the bond value cannot be received. You can't exceed that amount in terms of revenue for the life of the bond. And as Mark said, we track each bond issue, what it purchased, what activity relates to it, if we have a rent facility, if we're parking, all that is tracked and managed to make sure we stay below that 10% threshold.
Further discussion on this?
I guess I do. I have a comment or two on it. Well, I certainly respect that and don't want us to be in a situation where the tax-exempt bonds would become an issue. I mean, the new rental rates for these first 21 months, that equals out to about $7.26, if my math is correct, per square foot. And in contrast to the current lease, where they're at 14, reducing the lease amount, almost 50%, and then the 2 years following goes up to $8.17, and onward to where even for the last 2 years of this 10-year lease, so 2026, 2027, even at that point, not accounting for inflation or anything else, you're only at below $11 still. That is not market appropriate for this, or market standard for this area. For Uptown, I know that this has become quite a destination, and those lease rates are just lower than what you see elsewhere in this market for this space, like what we're providing. Comment. And then question, I guess, in the amendment to the lease, it also mentions exterior alterations and signage. Is that something that is the responsibility financially of Subway?
It is. It's responsible as Subway, and we said we would try to work with them to try to increase the visibility of this location. That's one of the challenges. We don't typically allow the exterior signs that you find on most subways on this building. We said we would try to work with them on maybe some sandwich boards and some other things that might help attract patrons from the street into the restaurant, because the lion's share of their customers come from within the transportation center itself, customers here. But any expenses involved in that type of signage would be borne by the tenant. The other thing I'll just add, Mr. Preston, again, is remember, we require them to be open when the station is open. So there are periods of time where there's not much customer traffic, and I think most businesses probably would say it doesn't pay for us to be open and paying help, but we like them to be here to provide service to our patrons both early in the morning and late at night. And frankly, if we continue to insist upon the current rent structure, there's very little doubt in my mind that they would probably have to discontinue operation once their lease is expired, because their sales numbers do not justify the lease rate they're paying. I would grant you that in most conventional retail spaces, the $7 or $8 a square foot is well below market. But given the kind of the circumstances they deal with here, they're not generating enough business to justify the lease terms, the lease rates that we were charging previously. Again, and I think it's our motivation. They've done a good job. I think they provide a good service. I don't know of any other restaurant there may be others out there that could come in and serve us as well. So we certainly want to continue that operation here. But I'm convinced that if we were unwilling to make an adjustment in these lease rates, they probably would eventually have to leave the space, and then we'd be left to try to find some sort of a replacement.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. Item G is an ordinance amending the liquor code concerning hours of operation. Mr. Fritzen?
I move approval.
Second.
Mr. Fritzen?
Yeah, a couple of, or question, some comments. First of all, just, I guess for some clarification, the report mentions that if this were to pass, then those restaurants who have video gaming would also be able to extend the hours of the video gaming. So just a clarification there that there's no separation of the two, I take it. Is that the way the...
Yes, that's correct. Under the State Video Gaming Act, they can do their video gaming during the hours that they're allowed to serve liquor.
Okay. I don't feel any compelling reason to adjust the hours myself. I think as I look back at our liquor code, we've moved from probably one of the strictest, tightest liquor codes in the state of Illinois to one that is pretty standard. And we've shown a great deal of sensitivity to the market, to market forces. We've created new classes of codes to try to respond to changes within the market. Extended hours made it easier to hold a license in normal when it came to the 50, a little over 50% of something other than alcohol on your revenue to a more manageable approach to things. So it just seems to me that we've continually loosened our code and responded to the market and to owners of establishments to give them hours, and I guess I'm just done doing that from my own personal perspective on this. So be interested in any other comments and others might have, and might even offer an amendment to the proposal if after discussion.
Further discussion on the item? Question? Comments? Ms. Lorenz?
Well, I think sort of one of the things in here that Mr. Fritzen mentioned kind of triggered me too. While I support this in concept, I was somewhat surprised to see the effect that it would have on the video gaming establishments, and I just don't want us to go down a path of some unintended consequences. I think we've worked hard in the last year or so to sew up some loopholes of some unintended consequences to maintain integrity of neighborhoods, and so forth. So, is there a way that we could, whether it be through amendment or I'm not sure what, exclude the video gaming establishments?
I'll defer to Mr. Day on that one.
I think certainly under our home rule authority, we could put limits. It would be an amendment to our video gaming ordinance to put restrictions on,
Days of the week.
certain hours, however the council wanted to put those limits on. I don't know. We have to determine what you want those to be.
Okay. We could do that at either now or at some point, not now, but
As
at
the
some
law exists
point,
now under
yeah.
our home rule authority, then we could limit the hours of video gaming outside of liquor service hours.
Okay.
I would, in the tone of unintended consequences, point out that there are gaming parlors and there are places that, such as Pub 2,
Okay.
that have gaming,
Yeah.
that
But
would
also have a
be
restaurant.
allowed to have gaming where others would not be allowed to have gaming. So that's something we should take into consideration.
Okay. Okay.
Further comments or discussion? Mr. Fritzen?
There's one other comment. Was kind of surprised to see that golf courses can begin serving at 7 a.m. Not sure why we have 7 a.m. For golf courses. Why not a more reasonable time of day for that? But I guess I would offer an amendment to the proposed ordinance, changing the 9 a.m. hour to 10 a.m. in all references.
So we have an amendment. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second. Discussion on that item. Please call the roll on the amendment. So the amendment is, again, to be clear, changing the starting time from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m.
Mrs. Cummings?
Hold on for a second.
It's loud out there. I think she responded.
I didn't hear, I'm sorry.
Ms. Cummings, can you restate your vote, or did you vote?
No, I just
Oh,
was checking
okay.
something. And the 10 a.m. is just for the, it's
All
for all the
references.
dates? I mean, all the days?
No, just Sunday.
So
I was unclear on the motion because
just-
there's multiple times that with
to
certain
clarify,
dates.
currently it's 11. It's proposed to go to 9. The amendment would make the start time 10. So it would move it up an hour from 11 to 10, as opposed to the original proposal, which was in the packet, which would go from 11 to 9.
I'm going to, I'm going to say nay.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
No.
Mr. McCarthy?
No.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
No.
Mayor Kus?
No. The ordinance did not pass. Now we're voting on the full ordinance unless there's further comment or discussion. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
No.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. We have one item of general orders, actually two items of general orders tonight. The first is a resolution accepting a proposal and associated budget adjustment and authorizing the city manager to negotiate a professional services agreement with Sports Facilities Advisory, LLC, to conduct a feasibility study and economic impact analysis of the multi-sport facility.
Approval.
Second.
Second, is there discussion on this item? Mr. McCarthy?
Thank you. Gotten a few emails and communications from citizens, and I just want to clear up a little bit of what seems to be confusion. Is we're not actually voting on a complex or how to pay for anything tonight. What we're doing tonight is voting to get some information on whether or not we think there's a real opportunity to move forward in our community. And so that means on a market analysis, likely potential of the economic opportunity for undertaking a multi-sport facility, or somebody said an investment in rectangular fields, whatever they serve. And so to be clear, we're not actually voting to move forward on anything tonight, rather than just to study the matter.
Mr. Preston?
Yeah, a question for staff. In our packet, it mentions that the Convention and Visitors Bureau has pledged support for this study and will be partnering with the town to ensure a thorough evaluation process, effective community engagement, practical final report that can be useful to community stakeholders. To what extent, I guess, do we know, or have we had conversations with the CVB leadership about what that commitment or that partnership looks like?
We don't know the extent, Mr. Preston. I did speak with Crystal Howard early on, and she felt confident that her board would approve some financial commitment to the study. You'll remember a study that was undertaken, every bit of 10 years ago, maybe more, was shared 50-50 between the CVB and the town of Normal. That was a slightly different project, but similar. So I would, I guess I'm based upon Ms. Howard's representation, I'm confident that they will make a commitment, but she hasn't had an opportunity to discuss this with her board. I have, just today I reached out to Ms. Howard, left her a message that I would like to talk to her soon about that. So, but unfortunately I don't have a specific amount to suggest that they will commit, but I'm fairly confident that they will commit some significant amount of dollars. They did have a representative sit in on the interviews with the 4 final firms, and so they have been part of the process to date.
And are they the only community partner that has pledged support in partnering in this?
Yes, I have. I did talk with my counterpart with the city of Bloomington and invited the city to participate in the study as well. He indicated that he would share that invitation with his council and would let me know. He wasn't, terribly optimistic that they would choose to participate, but we certainly wanted to include them if they would like to be included. So he hasn't given me a definitive answer yet.
Welcome, former council member Cheryl Gaines. Good evening. Mr. Fritzen.
Yes. This is a subject that there's been a great deal of discussion for many years. Ever since the initial information coming from the FAA that supposedly we had to vacate the recreational fields and the fields that are used to host at least one, if not two, significant tournaments with out-of-town teams coming to the community on an annual basis. And so we've come to this point where I think it's time to fish or cut bait, right? I think we've decided among ourselves that a full-blown study is the best way to go forward with this, rather than the hunt and peck that's been going on for the last several years. We did have a couple of business people in the community who came forward with a proposal that they worked hard on for both an indoor facility, perhaps replacing the YMCA, and also the outdoor facility. And more recently, we've had a private developer working with a local landowner promoting the concept of a multi-field, multi-sport complex more as an economic development project. And so there has been much talk, there has been much interest from many aspects of the community, and I think the popularity of soccer, the accessibility of soccer to the masses are things that should drive, I think, our interest in determining once and for all if this is feasible. Soccer doesn't require a lot of equipment. It's fairly inexpensive when it comes to outfitting a child to play the game, and so I think it's a sport that provides an opportunity where some other sports may not be attainable to some. So I think we have to take those things in consideration. I do think Mr. McCarthy's comments earlier to make sure people understand that this is a feasibility study and not a decision to do anything up or down. Even if the feasibility study comes back and says your community is prime for this type of facility, that doesn't mean we'll proceed. We have to be able to figure out how are we going to finance it, how are we going to operate it. It's one thing to build it, it's another thing year in and year out to operate it. So I think the study is necessary. People scoff at the spending this kind of money for a study, but we don't have the in-house expertise or time to conduct this kind of study. Our folks will work alongside this company to help advise and make sure they understand the community and what our needs are. So it's a partnership, a consultant like this. I think the other thing to emphasize is that these fields will not be just recreational fields. It's not just going to be a new home for PCSL. In fact, PCSL will have to compete with other, if this were to ever come to fruition, PCSL would have to compete for time with other endeavors, and so it's just time after many years of comment to actually get some hard and fast numbers that we can make a sound decision on. So I think it's something we need to do.
Mr. McBride?
Mr. Fritzen beat me to it on a couple of things, but you're absolutely right. Of course, even a study that comes back very positive does not mean that we're going to even be able to move forward. And I know some folks have mentioned our seeming difficulty in partnering with other local municipalities, and certainly that is going to be a major concern moving forward. And I think we do a study like this so that we have all the information at our disposal. And I know that's how I feel, and I know that my colleagues all feel the same way. I've also not personally been shy about how I feel about this as a concept. I think we're already a hub for sports tourism. We're already a successful hub for sports tourism when you consider our softball tournaments, our youth golf tournaments, the State Farm Holiday Classic basketball tournament, IHSA events. So we've already proven that we are a successful sports hub, and I think we can build upon that. As most of you know, for parts of my working career, and I continue to do so, I travel a lot to cover sports. And I see how much money families spend in the communities in which they're visiting. So, sure, you could make a case that these facilities don't pay for themselves as far as a municipal or government investment is concerned, but done right and in the right location, they more than pay for themselves with motor fuel tax, or sales tax, or food and beverage tax, hotel motel tax. So this isn't the Coliseum, this isn't the Springfield monorail, this is, couldn't help it. This is worth studying, and I wholeheartedly support it. Where it goes from here, I don't think any of us know.
Fair enough. Ms. Lorenz?
Thank you. I've got some notes that I'd like to share, and I'll start up by saying that I do support the study and the reasons why I support money, at least some of the $47,000 being spent by the town, because I did receive input saying, why should a dime of public dollars, of tax dollars, be spent even on the study? And here's why. You know, at one level, this is a Parks and Rec issue, because we do know that the fields out by the airport are not there for much longer. And from my understanding, to the point that one of the commenters said about the FAA, the real decision maker here on the continuation of that lease or not is really our own airport authority. Now, the FAA has their rules, and they have made those clear to our authority that if they continue to extend the lease to the soccer clubs there, that they may put at risk some of their funding. But it's not the FAA or any of particular regulation that's really stopping it. It's really the decision and I think the prudent decision-making of our airport authority to make sure that they stay in good standing for the maximum amount of resources that they can achieve. So, so at one level, this is really a Parks and Rec issue, because when those fields go away, it's going to be a gigantic impact on our parks, Bloomington's parks, any piece of grass. And so on that level, I commend our Parks and Rec staff for realizing that and putting in motion this study, because if in fact it doesn't make sense to build something large, then we rule that out. And then we know that in order for that 60 acres of activity space to be replaced in some way, we know what we're dealing with then. We need to then find, you know, 2 30-acre land or, you know, additional park space somewhere else. So I commend them for thinking ahead. And to the other point on Parks and Rec, you know, the old adage of we plan our work and work our plan, in the Parks and Rec master plan was the need for additional sports space. Let's call them rectangle fields, whether they're diamonds for baseball. There was that need surfaced from our Parks and Rec study. And so in planning our work and then working that plan, I think it makes sense to do a deeper dive into this particular issue. So on Parks and Rec alone, that is one reason why I think it does fall within our purview to spend dollars on it. And if that doesn't convince you, then I think the economic development issue is the other, because as we're talking about here, we're now seizing an opportunity to potentially fix a Parks and Rec issue and saying, you know, we could maybe make some money on this as in our economy. Because if we built it just a little bit bigger and thought a little bit broader than just the 60 fields made for soccer in the community, and we built it for rectangle fields that could take a number of different sports, as Mr. Kohlhaas pointed out, and you know, cross country and so forth, gosh, you know, maybe this would be something that could help stimulate our economy. Because we know that, you know, the days of relying on some of our traditional economic drivers in the form of some large insurance company or automotive manufacturer from Japan, those days, you know, are seeing significant changes. And so we are realizing for the maybe first time in many, many years, we've got to be creative about the economic drivers of our community. We got to think, yeah, let's invest in a startup automotive company that's building a new niche in the automotive industry. You know, we recently attracted Brant from Canada. I think this goes along with that creative thinking, if you will, for improving the portfolio of our economy. And there is big business, as Mr. McBride pointed out. There is huge business with youth sports. And if you don't believe it, think about it this way. Professional sports is a big industry, yes? I think we could probably all agree to that. Collegiate sports is a huge industry. Mr. McBride pointed to that. These youth sports are a feeder to those two industries. And I know that because I've lived it with my children, who are now 22 and 20, so they're past this stage. But we saw the waves of kids and their parents who take them out there and spend $500, at a minimum, $500 a weekend to go to places like Belleville, Illinois, or Rockford, Illinois, or Milwaukee, Wisconsin, even Champaign. And depending on the times of the games, yes, you might stay overnight in Champaign because the game might be at 7:30 in the morning. And so at a minimum, you're looking at $500. If it rains, you're about $1,000 because you just drop a few more $100 at the Dave & Buster's and the Dick's Sporting Goods because you got to do something with these 10-year-olds. So there is a lot of money in these weekends, ridiculous amount of money. And so the beneficiaries here is really those of us who call this place home, because tourists will come and they will spend money in our Dick's Sporting Goods and in our Sky Zones and certainly at our gas stations. The beneficiaries are the kids who get to come and perfect their sport sort of in a combine fashion, and the coaches that come and see them and recruit them for their higher education institutions to fulfill their sports teams and a mission of their university. So that's the whole economic driver to this thing. It starts at Parks and Rec, and there's a level of it at Parks and Rec, but as we are looking at it here, we're also trying to seize possibly an opportunity for this to be an economic driver. A great place to start is to spend about $47,000, which would probably be certainly less than 1%, probably a fraction of 1% of the cost of the total investment. And if anybody's worked in any sort of innovation department or R&D, that is a small price to pay. Businesses do it all the time, to invest small in a big idea and know whether you're going to keep it or throw it out. So on those two reasons, I support this, and I would urge those in the community who maybe don't agree with these ideas of public dollars on these sorts of venues to consider those two ideas and consider that that's why we're taking the direction that we are. Private dollars, why they haven't done it up to this point is telling. You're right. There isn't a lot of money to be made in grass fields that are lined with goals. It's just not there. Grass fields are kind of like infrastructure. They're kind of like roads and sidewalks. But they build a path to an industry that can create money. It creates money in the activities that are there, and it creates a ripple effect in the economy and the businesses that surround those locations. The Subway, speaking of Subway, the Subway franchises, the PT office that might be there and open on a Saturday for the Twisted Ankle, the sports goods store. There is a ton of ripple effect to the economy, and that's what we're looking to seize with this opportunity. If this thing comes back and it's like, nope, you guys have missed the boat, Rockford's got it, Indianapolis got it, Iowa's got it already, we'll know, kind of to just make a decision and move on, as Mr. Fritzen put it, to, kind of fish or cut bait. So I commend our town staff for taking a leadership on this. I urge CVB to be a participant, and I urge the City of Bloomington to be a participant too in this study.
Mr. McCarthy.
Thank you. I'll try not to be too redundant to what my counterparts have already said, but I suppose to further highlight for me why I support this feasibility study. One, I'm happy if we can help solve a community field space problem. But for me, I think this is a pricey idea, and I think it's well worth a small investment and good information for us to make great decisions on very expensive ideas. And so what doesn't seem to be prudent to me is to make decisions on expensive ideas without good information. So if for no other reason than that, I'm for supporting this feasibility study. Second, and if we think about the definition of economic development, although our young folks staying in our community and having places to play various forms of sports is important, I think the big idea here is, as Ms. Lorenz and my counterparts have alluded to, is that economic development is bringing dollars from outside of our community into our community. And that's what this would do. If you look around the community, though, this is the only significant economic development idea in our community today. This is it. This is the only one. If you look around our community, what else are we considering to bring more jobs and more revenue into our community? This is it. Again, for that idea alone, I would support pursuing this as an idea to help our community grow. You heard me 2 meetings ago talk about, over the last number of years, I forget how many, we've lost approximately 9,000 jobs in our community. That has had a very significant impact on our revenues all across the board. Again, this is the only idea in our community to change that course of our community revenue. And so, again, for that idea alone, I'm in support of this idea. Thank you.
Further comments? Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. Item 8 is an ordinance abating the levy of the 2017 property tax for Rivian Automotive in accordance with our agreement in the 2016 Economic Incentive
Move
Agreement.
approval.
Thank you. Discussion on this item.
I just had one small thing to
Certainly. Ms. Cummings.
I know I've had a few questions, as this had been approved prior to me coming on to council. For me, this is not an easy one, because I trust let me start with this. I very well trust the decisions of our staff, who are very competent. This has just one of those things, people always ask me, what keeps you up at night? And this is one of those things that have always kept me up at night, being on the council, because of the unknowns with this company. And so I further have, still this, I guess, having seen much from them or heard much from them, and even in presenting this information, there was nothing additional to say, this is what we've seen so far, and everything seems very secretive and convoluted at this point. So there's, tonight, in order to continue to keep our word, once again, because it was put together before me being on council, it will be some hesitation, but I understand we also want to make sure that we keep our agreements as we go forward. But I certainly want it to be known that there's still some concern for me about Rivian. I come from a very heavy automotive household. There is not one digest or weekly or monthly magazine, and I still don't see them even being talked about, even when you talk about some of the up-and-comings who you don't necessarily know that are not the General Motors. Their name still has not been presented, and there's still hardly any evidence. And to me, I'm just so nervous that we'll be an episode of American Greed one day with this type of deal. So I'm hoping that it works out for the better. I'm hoping that they really start to push for a presence to show that they're doing something and to bring some comfort to someone like me who's very, very unsure with them.
Fair enough. Further comments? Mr. Fritzen?
I guess I think there were some specific, benchmarks that were part of the agreement that had to be satisfied, and there's a letter accompanying the report here from the Economic Development Council that indicates those have been met. So I'm happy to know that that progress is being made. I mean, I'm not an expert in the automotive industry and at all, but a startup type company like this can't make it go without investors. And it seems that if nothing else, R.J. Scaringe is good at attracting investors, and I think investors are attracted to good ideas and somebody with vision, and I think that's what that's the attractive thing to me in having Rivian in the community. Sure, it's there's some gamble, some risk in it, I'm sure, but I think from our point of view, the risk is fairly minimal, and those benchmarks have to be met. So I'm comfortable with it.
Mr. McBride?
Along similar lines, yes, this is something that was already agreed to. They're hitting the benchmarks. I'm excited to see where it goes from here. I want to be careful not to relitigate decisions that have already been made, of which I was supportive and personally continue to be committed to. There has been some good news that's publicly available within the recent months. Rivian has attracted a very major investor. I think that's very positive. Sometimes, and of course I get asked about this too, when we're out, for whatever reason, sometimes that news doesn't penetrate the noise that's out there, whether it's about this or other issues. There's a lot of noise out there, as everyone is aware. I will say that it would be nice at some point, and I know this is part of the plan, and maybe Mr. Peterson, you can speak to this, if Rivian were to provide a public update, not just to us, but to all of their investors locally, I would certainly welcome that opportunity. I think that would be probably the best chance at cutting through that noise, but I also understand that they're trying to run a startup business, and that's not easy, and it requires a lot of time.
Mr. McCarthy?
Again, not to be too redundant, my counterparts covered it pretty well already. Basically, there wasn't the risk for the town here. If they invest and hire people, then we'll give them some relief of some tax abatement, is basically the contract. I do want to point out one thing is remember, these folks are investing in an asset that's in our community that has value. That value generates tax revenue. That's the only way they can actually get an abatement, is they're investing in that plat. Eventually, that provides future benefit for our education system and for everybody else in this community. They are maintaining a highly leveraged asset in our community for us. Whether they actually survive as a startup company, to Mr. McBride's point, or not, they are maintaining that asset in our community for us by investing in it. Should they, the worst case scenario is they not, survive, we have a invested in plant that hopefully we could attract somebody else to. Don't get me wrong, I hope and believe that they'll be successful, and that I think would be the best for everybody in their community, but I don't think we can underestimate the importance of them investing in our community.
Ms. Lorenz?
Yeah, I want to also point out that while it's something that from time to time I'll hear about too, what's going on with Rivian. I like the idea that Mr. McBride just brought up, and I would just point out that I caught a piece, I think it was on the radio this week, that the news coming out of Rivian from Mr. Scaringe himself is quite encouraging in terms of a recent hire of he's rounding out his executive team, and is talking about hundreds of jobs by the end of this year, I believe, which would put him ahead of schedule. So right now, the word from them that I'm picking up through other sources of the news outlets is encouraging, and so I don't want that to be lost on any of this discussion either. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments? Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. We have no new business. Before taking a motion for adjournment, are there comments or concerns? Mr. Preston?
Just one, Mayor. I believe that a special guest who you announced in the audience tonight, former council member Cheryl Gaines, is celebrating a special day to be with us, if I'm correct.
Right.
I think it is her birthday today, so wanted to make sure that was at least acknowledged along with her presence here tonight.
Sorry, no cake. Mr. Peterson?
I also wanted to make an announcement and an introduction. Our newest department head is here, Beth Wisman. Raise your hand, Beth. Beth started a week ago, Monday, and she's hit the ground running, and we have a major event tomorrow at 11 o'clock at the Children's Discovery Museum. It's the launch of a new brand that's at 11 o'clock. You're all invited to be there, and we're delighted to have Beth on board.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Fritzen?
Aye.
Mr. McBride?
Aye.
Mrs. Cummings?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye, we are adjourned.